If we take a look at the generation that came of age during the Depression and fought during World War II, they were given the name the greatest generation. And there's a reason why they were given that label. That generation was known for being practical, prudent, self-sacrificing, creative, and humble. What was it about the greatest generation that made them unique? And what was it about their formative years that contributed to who they were? So let's explore that today and find out. The people of this time faced many trials and hardships, unlike anything previous generations before them had experienced in the past. And though they were far from perfect, they rose to the occasion and they succeeded in overcoming the major issues of their time. And if they had failed, our world would look a lot different than it does today. History can be a great teacher, and not only can we use it to learn about things that happened in the past, but it also helps us to look at things in a different light, as in it can help us make decisions about things that impact us now and in the future. So today we're going to have a look at the greatest generation and what made them tick. First, there was a sense of personal responsibility. Kids growing up during the Great Depression didn't have an easy childhood. They were surrounded by poverty and the tough economic realities of the day. And they often had to forego school to sell newspapers or shine shoes to contribute financially to the family in some way. And after the Depression, we went right into World War II, so they had to deal with a lot of very serious and adult circumstances. But what they learned during that time was invaluable because they became a very determined and can-do generation. And that's why they were known for the saying, use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. And the difficult sacrifices they had to make during the Depression and World War II fostered a sense of courage and strength of character that allowed them to get through the different hardships of life, rebuild after the war, and decades after that. Also, humility was a character trait that many people of the Great Generation possessed. My father-in-law served in World War II in the Navy, and he enlisted when he was 16 years old. Now, you had to be 18 to join, but he went down to the enlisting office, lied about his age so that he could join the war effort. And when I asked him about it years ago, he said to me that he and others saw the threat to freedom and democracy and all the things that were happening in Europe at the time, and he knew that he had to somehow join in the effort to preserve our freedom and democracy. After he died, my husband found a lot of medals and memorabilia from that time period that he never talked about. He never talked about his achievements or things that he had done that were great. He just viewed his service in the military as a job that needed to be done and completed and left it at that. Work ethic. In our culture today, there's a big push on finding your passion and finding a lot of personal fulfillment in the job that you have. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with that, and it's certainly a worthy pursuit, in times past, that wasn't the focus. Finding a job that you loved wasn't what people were turning their attention to. What they loved was finding a way to provide security for their family and their loved ones. People put more of an emphasis on the well-being of their families, so they learned to find joy in the work that they did, such as taking the time to do a job well done and taking pride in that. People were also less individualistic when it came to the money that they earned. As some of you know, my grandfather on my mother's side was a tailor, and he taught all three of his girls how to sew. And if my mom sewed someone a skirt or her sister sewed someone a blouse or whatever it was that they made, the money that they earned went into a drawer, and that was the household money. There wasn't an idea of, oh, this is the money that I earned from that particular project, therefore it's mine. It all went into the household funds. And then my grandmother would dole out spending money for the girls, and my mom said that they didn't even have wallets to hold their cash in. She said they would walk to the market holding their cash in their hand, and they would look at all of the beautiful things and see what it was that they could actually afford and take home. Next, Financial frugality was another earmark of this generation because the economic hardships of the Great Depression impacted this generation greatly. They were always saving money for a rainy day. And many of them became millionaires later on in life, but they were still very frugal with their money because they always wanted to have money put aside for emergencies or a rainy day. And it didn't matter how much money they earned or how little money they earned, they always managed to squirrel away something in savings. And more often than not, they saved other things too, like buttons and scraps of fabric and elastic bands and jars and scraps of clothing, anything that could be used or reused for another project later on. But also because of the economic hardship that they endured, they wanted to ensure that they wouldn't have to go through something like this again. So they were also responsible for creating a lot of economic opportunity that came in decades afterward. There were strong commitments to marriage and family. During the 1920s and 30s, families stayed together and marriages stayed together because people took their vows very seriously. Hanging out and hooking up just wasn't the norm, and if a couple took a shine to each other, they got married, and more often than not, stayed that way. Divorce just wasn't an option, and that doesn't mean that marriages were perfect, but when people got married and started families, there was no real sense of, well, let's see how this works out in a few years and go from there. One of my dear friends, Dee, is in her 70s now, and she told me a story about when she first got married and she had an argument with her husband, and she immediately went to her parents' place, and her father wisely said to her, you know, you need to work this out. You're married now. You're in this for the long haul. This is something that you need to work out together. And expectations were different in those days. People weren't expecting their spouse to complete them. So their commitment was higher, and as a result, the divorce rate was much, much lower. What really stands out to me with everything we've discussed is that this generation had a really common sense and uncomplicated attitude towards life. They didn't really think about what model of washing machine or refrigerator enhanced their image or their status. They just bought what worked well. Also, people looked really put together and they dressed well without being a slave to fashion trends or trying to emulate celebrities. In this day and age, we're obsessed with ourselves, where our highest goal in life is to achieve our own personal happiness. We have this obsession with identity and there's this pressure to invent ourselves. But what is it actually producing? And I feel like especially with our young people today, it's producing a lot of anxiety. And one of the things I think can really help us is to become more outer focused and to focus more on other people rather than ourselves, and we can find more fulfillment in that. We can all cultivate things like self-discipline, a sense of responsibility, and humility. These are all wonderful, admirable virtues to have, and they help us build character and a sense of integrity. The study of generations is fascinating because there are remarkable and wonderful things about each one, and it's interesting to notice what forms some of our character in ourselves and in others. And the greatest generation overcame so many hardships to make the world a better place for us, and they have much to teach us. Thanks so much for joining in, everyone. Stay well, and we'll catch you in the next one.